Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining our CCPCJ side event this morning. Denmark has organized this side event with the support of Ghana, Norway, Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, the African Union Commission, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, GI-TOC. For Denmark, conflict and instability in the Sahel region are very important issues which have broad effects regionally and internationally, and the impact on the local population cannot be underestimated. Unfortunately, the general security situation in the region is deteriorating as we are witnessing increased hostile activities by terrorist groups and criminal organizations. Furthermore, climate change causes rising temperatures and drought, which increase the challenges with food security, poverty, and displacement. Understanding the interconnections between instability, conflict, and organized crime are vital if we are to respond effectively as an international community. Here at the CCPCJ, we are discussing the important topics of ensuring the access to justice and realizing safe and secure societies. Hence, it is relevant to discuss the local and regional links between organized crime, instability, and conflict in the Sahel region and West Africa, with a particular focus on the accelerant markets of cattle rustling and kidnapping. The research of GI-TOC shows that these two markets have demonstrated a strong reinforcing link with instability. Without understanding those links, we cannot effectively address these issues, build strategies to make communities safer, and to provide them with access to justice. As such, we are delighted to be organizing this side event to follow for an important discussion based on the research findings of GI-TOC's regional observatory in West Africa and the Sahel region. From GI-TOC's presenters, we will hear more about their illicit hub mapping and the illicit economies and instability monitor. These tools provide an overview of illicit economies and enable us to identify the ripple effect of key illicit hubs on conflict and stability across West Africa. We will also hear viewpoints from the government of Germany, which has been funding GI-TOC's work in this area, and the African Union Commission, which will provide us with a continental perspective. Finally, the ambassador of Switzerland will share his perspective. Thank you again for coming today, and we look forward to fruitful discussions. Now I have the pleasure to present the first speakers from GI-TOC, Mr. Mohamedou Kane and Ms. Flora Berger. Mr. Kane is an analyst at GI-TOC's Observatory of Illicit Economies in West Africa with a geographic focus on Senegal and Guinea. And Ms. Flora Berger is also from the Observatory of Illicit Economies in West Africa and has a specific geographic focus on Mali and Burkina Faso. Furthermore, Ms. Flora Berger's research focuses on armed groups' engagement in criminal markets and the links between organized crime and instability. Ms. Berger, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining despite the very early schedule. Special thank you to Denmark for sponsoring or organizing the event and chairing it as well, and for allowing us to present the work this morning. Just wanted also to thank Germany, and I see that, yeah, Tobias is online. Special thank you to Germany for funding the work of the West Africa Observatory. I just wanted to do a quick introduction before Mohamedou takes over, just to explain basically what the key goal of the West Africa Observatory is, because it really, all the work that we're going to present and that we do is fitting that goal. So I thought it was maybe useful to introduce it in person here. So the West Africa Observatory is one of three at GI-TOC covering the African continent. And the key goal of our program is to build the evidence base around intersection between illicit economies and instability in the region. Because as conflict and illicit economies increasingly overlap, we want to make sure that we understand this overlap and the relationship between the two. And Basically, we often hear that crime feeds into conflict and vice versa, but illicit economies can also bring important sources of livelihood and stability. So it's not maybe as easy as it sounds, and that's why we do this work. And yeah, I will let now. Actually, we can get to the next slide. Where basically the title of our program is, so it's promoting stabilization through crime-sensitive intervention. And so all the stabilization initiatives that are taking place in the region, we advocate for them to be crime-sensitive in order not to have counterproductive effects. So Muhammadu, I'll let you take over now to present the illicit hub mapping, and then I'll jump in again.
Thank you very much, Fleur. So next slide, please. If I can have the next slide, thank you. So as Fleur said, today we'll be reflecting on the findings of the flagship program of the West Africa Observatory at the Global Initiative, and which is the illicit hub mapping tool and instability and illicit hub economies monitor. And what this adds to our understanding of the intersection between illicit economies on one side and conflict on the other, focusing on West Africa. Indeed, the online mapping tool accessible to all our website is special mapping of hubs of illicit economies, and the monitor enables the identification of key hubs and their knock-on effect on instability. Both together, they can serve as a basis for targeted action to respond to illicit economies as part of a wider stabilization toolkit. Next slide, please. So as Flo said, we will be today reflecting on the findings of the flagship program product of the West Africa Observatory at the Global Initiative. And what this adds to our understanding of the intersection is that actually for this specific project, there were two major steps. First, the Global Initiative coordinated a mapping on illicit economies across West Africa while identifying key hubs on illicit markets. This actually sought to build a granular picture of sub-national illicit economy dynamics and to create a public consolidated repository of evidence around illicit markets. So once identified, we also wanted to see which actually illicit hubs were most closely linked to a conflict instability. So that was the second step of the process. We developed the illicit economies and instability monitor, as Flor just now said it, which gives a score of each illicit hub based on the extent to which the illicit economies in the hub act as a vector of conflict and instability. So we're looking closely at the link between conflict and crime, or instability and crime. So based on the score, each hub is classified as either low, medium, high, or very high. We will be explaining it in the coming slides. Next slide, please. Next one. Thank you. So as I mentioned just now, the monitor assesses to what extent illicit markets in a specific hub operate as a vectors of conflict and instability. So the monitor is, as you can see, a score of 30 overall, and each hub can be grouped into one of 4 different categories based on the overall score. I mean, low or moderate, high, or also, if you want, very high. It's also important here to stress that when we say high, for example, we're talking specifically about the nexus between illicit economies and conflict and instability, not only just crime or instability, because here it's very important to lay the stress on that, the link between instability and conflict when we talk about high, moderate, or very high. Next slide, please. So what are the main findings here for the West African region? Basically, the key takeaway is that each illicit market has a contrasting relationship with instability. And as you can see, some are closely linked, while some have no correlation with instability. We don't have to go one by one here with each illicit market, but we'll just take two extremes. The first one, which is at the bottom of the table, is cocaine trade. What this means is that we see cocaine trade happening mostly in hubs that have a low monitor score, like in Dakar, Banjul, Conakry, and Bissau, meaning where the nexus between instability and crime is not that strong. To some extent, the product of geography and importance of coastal hubs are important points. But also because cocaine is among the most high-value commodities flowing through the region. So trafficking networks often avoid the most high-risk environment in the Sahel, like in Mali, Libya, etc. And basically, cocaine and instability don't go together, as you can see by the evidence of what's going on in the coastal region, in the coastal part of West Africa. So at the top of the table, we have armed trafficking. Here, this underscores the understanding that arms market has a strong self-reinforcing relationship with instability. And more violence fuels the armed market as more people want to protect themselves, which is normal and will do not. And usually when they try to protect themselves, they purchase arms. And more arms circulating in the region will lead to more violence and instability. So both of these actually fuel, instability fuels the trafficking of armed trafficking fuels also violence. This is what we call here accelerant market. And for us, because the program aims at promoting stability through crime-sensitive operation, accelerant market are key. And there are the criminal markets that matters the most because of the relationship with instability. We have also cattle rustling and kidnapping for ransom, also among the illicit economies to feature far more prominently in illicit hubs that are more significant vectors of conflict and instability than those that are not. So now Flo will take over and present, go deeply in the accelerant market. Thank you. Over to you, Flo.
All right. Thank you, Mohamedou. So basically, for those who have just arrived, so what we've done is like first identify all the illicit economies, right? This is the map. And then once we know what the illicit economies are, we rank them based on if they have a strong relationship with instability or not. And with this ranking, we obviously want to focus on the ones who have the strongest relationship with instability, not that the other ones don't matter, but they don't have they don't impact negatively stability. So for us, they're not the core of our work. And that's what the accelerant markets are. They're the ones who have the strongest relationship with instability, both feeding each other. So if we go to the next slide, what Mohamedou has presented so far is findings for West Africa. But today we are here to speak more precisely about the Sahel. And so to kind of have a better picture of what's happening in the Sahel, we twisted a bit the data to focus on high fatality regions, which are today in West Africa, mostly the Central Sahel, so Mali, Burkina, and Niger, and also the north of coastal West African countries as the security threats are moving south. So this is the markets that have the strongest links with instability in the Sahel. So arms trafficking, Mohamedou already explained. I think the relationship between the two is pretty obvious between arms trafficking and violence. And it's also been the topic of a lot of research in the organized crime sphere. But kidnapping for ransom and cattle rustling, I think, are less understood. And I mean, a lot of people even ask me, like, why are you talking about cattle rustling? Well, for the region, it really matters more than cocaine trade, for example. It destabilizes the region way more. It has a bigger impact, etc. So I just want to make very clear why we focus on these illicit economies and not others. It's not that we pick them. It's that based on our data, those are the ones that matters. So if we go to the next slide, I'll start to explain a bit about cattle rustling. I mean, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll really give you like kind of the key characteristics of each market. So for cattle rustling, here you have a map of Mali as with the hotspots of cattle rustling. So you can see it's mostly in central Mali and in northeast, which are also the hotspots of violence. So the two overlap. The first point is basically why we talk about this today is the first point is the surge in 2021 and 2022. So cattle rustling is very old. It has always happened. It's almost like a cultural thing in the region as well. But in the past 2 years, the numbers have really increased in Mopti region. So in central Mali, this represents more than 5,000 animals looted every single week of the year. And in 2021, it was more than the total of the 3 previous consecutive years. So it's a massive surge. And in 2022, it was a bit displaced in the northeast because not that it stopped in central Mali, it really didn't, but in the northeast, we had the resurgence of Islamic State Sahel province operating in Menaka and Gao after the French Operation Barkhane left. That created a security void. So armed groups obviously were keen to fill that. And we've seen in 2022 very high levels there. The second point is that cattle rustling is a key driver of conflict. And again, because our program focuses on these links with instability, that's for us a key point. And from an illicit economy perspective, cattle rustling really stands out regarding the degree to which it intersects with conflict. Basically, what happens is that there's a village that is the pastoralist communities, and there's an attack and the cattle is looted or the animals are looted. This village will then take up arms to protect themselves or join an armed group, whether jihadists or self-defense militias or other type of groups. And they will then attack the community next door and vice versa. So it's really a key driver of the violence and of civilian casualties. The last point is that cattle rustling is really a key element, both in terms of the governance of armed groups and in terms of financing. On the governance side, basically armed groups are perpetrators of cattle rustling, so they do loot, the cattle, but they also then protect against cattle rustling. So they will protect the communities that they're trying to govern against looting from others, and that increases their legitimacy in that specific community. And at the same time, by the way, because the state is not very present in these areas, their legitimacy diminishes and armed groups' legitimacy increases, which allows them to obviously expand and spread. So, and outside of protecting from cattle rustling, they've also started to manage the movement of animals, because it's based on the seasons and rainy season and so on. So animals move a lot in the country. It's not like they stay in one place. And they've facilitated this movement, which the communities, obviously, they live with their animals and their livelihood is based on livestock. So for them, it's really key to be able to move around freely. So as I said, it's key for governance, and it explains why basically armed groups, for example, in central Mali are doing so well. And from a financing perspective, it's also interesting because cattle rustling has proven to be a resilient source of financing compared to other illicit economies. So armed groups in the region will rely on a lot of different illicit economies for resourcing, trafficking of cigarettes, of fuel, gold mining, kidnapping, that I'll speak about later. But cattle rustling has really proven to be resilient in that the economy has not been displaced like cocaine, who was transiting through the Sahel and now has been displaced because of the conflict. And it hasn't changed. It has increased this illicit economy. So It's key to financing, and because Mali is the second exporter of cattle in the whole of West Africa after Nigeria, it means that people continue to buy animals, and there's a strong demand. And if there's a strong demand, they will easily find ways to sell the animals once they looted them. So those are the key elements about cattle rustling. There's obviously way more to say, and we just published a report that's available for you to take if you haven't yet. So feel free to do that. And now just wanted to talk quickly about kidnappings. So if we can go to the next slide. So kidnappings, we looked at it mostly in Burkina Faso, but what I'm going to talk about today is kind of valid for the rest of the region, Mali and Niger included, and as I said today, in Benin and Togo as well, and we're conducting more research into that at the moment. So unlike cattle rustling, kidnapping has completely, the industry has completely changed. So it used to be a very small amount of armed groups, and within these armed groups, a very small amount of people at the very top leadership who were deciding basically who to kidnap and where to keep them, etc. And it was targeting mostly Westerners. So this is in the early 2000s. Today, we've seen a huge increase in the numbers of kidnappings, but also the vast majority of today kidnappings are Sahelians. Westerners are still kidnapped, and I mean the recent news about some of them being released shows that, but the vast majority are Sahelians. And that's interesting for us because while the kidnapping of foreigners were very interesting financially for the groups, we're talking about millions in ransom, they had little impact on local communities. Like kidnapping a Westerner in northern Niger is not going to have a huge impact on the communities. But now that the kidnappings are targeting Sahelians, obviously this has a much bigger impact, especially when the kidnappings are targeting the leaders of a region or a key businessman that obviously provide a lot of livelihood for the communities. And now basically what I put in the slide is from a financing to a governance venture, in that a lot of the motivations are not financial anymore. A lot of kidnappings are not motivated by a ransom, but they're motivated by governance and the willingness to expand. So there will be kidnapping for intelligence gathering, there will be kidnapping for intimidation, there will be kidnappings for humiliation, and of course, the ransom part of it still exists, and there's still people, either Westerners or local, for example, wealthy businessmen that get kidnapped and for a ransom, but it's not the financing that's driving the kidnappings today. And if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to conclude on policy implications, basically what you can do with all of this information. And it goes back to our main goal in this program, in that misdiagnosing the relationship between illicit economies and conflict can undermine the efficacy of stabilization operation or peacekeeping operations, for example. And in the worst case scenario, those initiatives can have counterproductive effects. And we've seen that in the region with a lot of crackdown, for example, that, it just makes the communities more reliant on armed groups, for example, which then increases their legitimacy. And it's not what we're trying to do when we want to stabilize a region. I just wanted to give you kind of four kind of concrete thing to think about when, if as a policymaker you want to design tailored responses. The stuff you can look at for an illicit economy, for example, is the revenue sharing arrangement. So, for example, if the illicit economy benefits a very small group of people, you can target that, and that will not have a huge impact on the community. But if this illicit economy is basically the source of livelihood for communities, and you crack down on that, you're basically going to have counterproductive effects. So the revenue sharing arrangement is one. And then the second one is the community concepts of legitimacy. So again, if that illicit economy is illicit for us, but it's legitimate for the community, you need to think twice about what you want to do about this. You can't just basically crack down on it, because you'll have backlash and you might drive, for example, recruitment into groups. The third point to think about is whether the illicit economy is in transit, or if it's you know, kind of produced and localized. So if the economy is just transiting, again, it often benefits a small group of people, and it doesn't have, communities don't benefit from it. So that's something you can basically, well, it's better to look at these economies than those who are really embedded within the local communities. And the last one is the relationship with intercommunal tension and the cattle rustling. I think I've already explained how it's really like part of the communities and drives violence. And, you know, those are the ones that should be the priorities, basically, to have a greater impact on instability and not have counter productive effects. So I'm done here. Hopefully that was helpful. And I will let now the other speakers. Yeah, all of our reports are been printed and they're ready for you to take.
Thank you very much, Flo and Mohamedou, for this very interesting presentation. The next speaker today is Dr. Olubusayo Akinola, who will be joining us online. Dr. Akinola is the Principal Program Officer responsible for drug control and crime prevention at the African Union Commission, and who has worked for several years at the Commission of the Economic Community of West African States on illicit drug trafficking, related organized crime, and drug abuse in West Africa. Dr. Akinola, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols duly observed. On behalf of Our Excellency, Ambassador Minata Samate Sisoma, Commissioner for Humanitarian Health and Social Development of the African Union Commission, it's a great pleasure to be part of this side event focusing on the underexplored Accelerant markets driving instability in the Sahel, kidnapping and cattle rustling. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, kidnapping and cattle rustling have emerged as a major security challenge in the continent of Africa as a whole, and the latest form of transnational organized crime that needs urgent attention. Cattle rustling has turned into banditry and insurgency and has deprived people, especially those living in the border areas of the forest, from access to their farms, drastically affecting their source of livelihood. The consequences affect the socio-economic, political, cultural, and psychological state of the region. More worrisome is the trends and dynamics of extant transformation of cattle rustling to kidnapping, with violence accentuated by militarized weapons, ruthless brutality, and deadly criminality. Kidnapping and cattle rustling, particularly in the Sahel and West Africa, has become a major source of concern, not only for its implications on the size of the herd and the suffering it generates, but also the threat it poses to the very survival of state institutions in places where it occurs, as the emergence of well-coordinated and well-funded criminal acts that has eroded the very fabric of our society. The African Union Commission takes note of this evolving pattern of transnational organized crime with immense criminal sophistication and efficiency as contemporary cattle rustlers operate within modern weaponry, and their operations are marked by translocalization and transnational syndication. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is important to reiterate that the African Union Agenda 2063 provides a shared strategic framework for inclusive growth and sustainable development for the socio-economic transformation of the continent over the next years. The first 10-year implementation plan of AU Agenda 2063 under its Aspiration 3, an Africa of good governance, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law, provides for improving the quality of justice and governance to realize the rights of citizens of the continent, which includes building strong institutions as cornerstones for development. Similarly, Aspiration 4, a peaceful and secure Africa, which provides for the updating of the African peace and security architecture to incorporate, among others, organized crime trends. The Commission underscores the need for the implementation of the African Union Plan of Action on Drug Control and Crime Prevention 2019 to 2025 in a sustainable way, and further reiterates its commitment to ensure effective formulation and implementation of policies capable of tackling the root causes of insecurity related to kidnapping and cattle rustling on the continent as a whole. The African Union Commission is therefore set to address this problematic transnational organized crime through ratifying international and regional instruments and by contributing timely intelligence to international, continental, and regional peace and security organs and mechanisms. In addition, for the establishment of a framework for the prosecution of persons engaged in the acts of banditry, kidnapping, cattle rustling, and other related crime to deter continued perpetration. As I conclude, I want to thank the many partners who have consistently believed in our vision and provided technical and financial support for the implementation of the AU Plan of Action on Drug Control and Crime Prevention. I would like to reiterate that common problems call for concerted action. It is only by working together that we can find practical solutions to the challenges that confront us. The challenges are many and may sometimes feel difficult to overcome, but they are not insurmountable if addressed in common purpose. It is therefore our sincere hope that the evidence before us will serve as an impetus for the Africa we want and effectively drive policy to provide a lasting solution that will effectively tackle kidnapping and cattle rustling in Africa. And on this note, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akinola, for sharing your valuable perspective with us. The next speaker is Mr. Tobias Grote, who is the team lead for security sector reform at the German Foreign Ministry, which has been funding GI-TOC's work in this area. Mr. Grote will be joining us online today. Mr. Grote, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frederick. Excellencies, dear partners and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel this morning. On behalf of the German Federal Foreign Office, I would like to thank the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime for their excellent work with the West Africa Observatory. As the GFFO is funding this important work strand of GI-TOC, I'm more than happy to share some thoughts on the findings that were just presented. The German Federal Foreign Office new foreign and security policy concept for an integrated action for peace sets out our ministry's approach to preventing and managing crises and conflicts globally. Because of the various ways in which illicit and illegal economies interact with instability, we have identified the intersection of organized crime and stability as a key area for our stabilization work around the globe. I will use the following minutes for some short remarks on how GI-TOC's research helps us in shaping our project work in the field of stabilization engagement, especially in West Africa and the Sahel region. There's a growing need for actionable evidence in our line of business, and we believe that this kind of research that GI-TOC is providing can contribute to satisfying this demand. It is a truism that armed conflicts are now often shaped by both local and transnational dynamics. In almost all conflicts, insurgency movements, militias, mercenaries, and criminal or terrorist groups operate across borders. There has been a growing recognition that crime permeates conflict from many angles. Criminal activity funds armed groups which have profited from war through looting and other forms of violent economic activity. At the same time, illicit and informal economic activities provide livelihoods for vulnerable populations. To translate the findings of GI-TOC into our stabilization work, we need to better understand how organized crime, conflict, and instability interact. For this, the hotspot mapping that was just presented of illicit markets in West Africa is a very valuable tool to us, since it puts a particular focus on those markets that are closely linked to instability, the so-called accelerant markets that Flor and Muhammadu just presented, and those markets that fuel violence and instability. Two of the markets that were just presented, kidnapping and cattle rustling, I just wanted to give you some remarks from our side on. As we have seen, kidnapping for ransom has played a key role in financing the early expansion of terrorist organizations in the Sahel. Today, kidnapping continues to act as an important revenue stream, but more importantly, plays a critical role in JNIM's strategy of territorial expansion. At the same time, cattle rustling, although present in West Africa for centuries, has become accelerated by the arrival of armed extremist groups. Indeed, increases in violent and large-scale cattle rustling can constitute for us an early warning sign of terrorist expansion. It also touches, as Flor just presented, to the heart of our understanding of the instability threat in the Sahel, which is, first of all, that they provide, as Flor just said, alternative models of governance, and at the same time challenge the legitimacy of the states in the region. So finding innovative ways to address these accelerant markets in West Africa will be of critical importance when thinking about stabilization in the wider Sahel region. It also relates to the conflict sensitivity of our stabilization engagement, which is, of course, critical for us. One important lesson we have learned from our ongoing stabilization engagement as a donor is that the success of interventions to address organized crime depends on a few critical questions, and I would briefly like to list them here. First, which illicit markets provide material or immaterial resources to violent extremist groups? Second, are communities affected by the harmful consequences of illicit activities, or are these activities perceived as locally legitimate? As Flor just said, we need to think twice before cracking down on them. Third, where are the primary hubs of illicit activity? So it's also a question of the regional focus of our engagement. And fourth, what role does the area play in the wider illicit economy? Improving our understanding of the interrelations between organized crime and instability will help us align our programmatic and policy approaches so that we can make our crisis engagement more successful. For this, it is also crucial to understand the early warning signs. As we have seen just now, understanding accelerant markets can help us with identifying these signs. Let me therefore thank again colleagues from Global Initiative and all who have contributed to this excellent piece of work. We will continue to map the situation and the challenges and to test our hypotheses and our theories of change in our daily project work. In this sense, I'm confident that today's meeting and the research that GI-TOC is conducting with their West Africa Observatory helps us advance our thinking as to how we can address organized crime in a challenging environment. Thank you for your attention, and I now hand back to you, Frederick.
Thank you very much, Tobias, for your intervention. The time has now come for our Q&A session. So please let me know if there are any questions from the floor or online. Jean-Marc?
Thank you very much, and thank you to GI-TOC for organizing this very interesting side event this morning. Thanks also to all the panelists for their excellent interventions. I have a question to Flo, who's with us here, and for distinguished panelists online, and especially for the African Union. I was wondering, considering the phenomena of cattle rustling, kidnapping for ransom, etc., how are these elements integrated in the peace and security architecture of the region? There is, of course, the MINUSMA from the UN, but there is also from the African Union the Nouakchott process, which is a regional initiative on Sahel. So I was wondering how these trends or new trends are, which play apparently a role or have an impact on the security situation and stability. How do they play a role, or how are they being considered within the different elements of a peace and security architecture, be it the UN or at the African Union level? Thank you.
Maybe I'll just give a few elements, and I think, then it would be great indeed to hear from the African Union. So on at least on the national side, so first obviously the authorities are the main actor there, right? And then at MINUSMA, for example, I think it's quite a new topic to be talked about. So I remember when I started 5 years ago, it was mentioned, but like there wasn't much research, it wasn't understood, and also really I think it was understood in the conflict, so like stabilization people, and obviously because of the impact on communities and the fact that it's a key driver of violence, it was understood in that as a factor impacting instability, but not as an organized crime or an illicit economy perspective. So I think in the past probably 2 years or a year, for example, MINUSMA have started talking about it, and we obviously work with them and we brief them, and they have now, for example, on cattle rustling, actually people following this trend and just doing a lot of data collection, because it's a big part of what they do is just doing data collection and understanding really what's happening. The same for kidnapping, because sometimes it does impact them, but also mostly because they work with the local communities, and they have it's their partners basically that are the victims. So for them it's like a big concern. But I would say that we're like, as far as the way I see it, we're more in the stage of understanding it, or these two economies, as organized crime, and the role that it plays in financing armed groups, the role that it plays in their governance strategy, rather than I haven't seen, for example, a strategy on how to tackle cattle rustling at MINUSMA, or maybe it hasn't translated yet into specific strategies on these two. But I think it's really, we're now like really kind of building momentum into understanding that they are the key illicit economies in the region. But maybe we can give the floor to the other speakers.
Thank you very much, Flo. Yes, I'll just give the chance for the other speakers to respond as well. Dr. Akinola, would you like to say a few remarks? And the same goes for you, Tobias. I'll start with you, Dr. Akinola.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. Just to say, to reiterate that cattle rustling and kidnapping actually have cross-cutting issues, and they have been seen as like a metaphor to the emerging transnational organized crime. And so we have different layers. This creates like a space that is considered in a safe contrast outside the existing maybe policy network and framework. So we might not have specific instruments that maybe deal directly with cattle rustling, and that is why this transnational organized crime, this particular side event is very important, bringing out the evidence and telling us that we have cross-cutting issues and cross-cutting policies. with crime prevention and in African Union. Currently, we also have the AU Plan of Action, which is currently being implemented from 2019 to 2025, which I also mentioned. And the AU Plan of Action prioritizes measures to address this crime prevention with emphasis on international cooperation. So these cross-cutting issues will be looked closely at. We would also be working closely with the GI-TOC to ensure that this evidence that has been presented today transform into an effective policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akinola. Tobias, do you have any remarks here?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe very briefly, if I may, because also as a donor and partner of the region, we of course think of how to integrate these topics and these issues into our engagement with the region. And maybe one avenue that comes into my mind is that, of course, we do a lot of capacity building work also with the region and with the security forces and institutions in the region. And one very concrete example is the West Africa Working Group of the Global Counterterrorism Forum, GCTF, where we are holding the co-chairmanship together with Algeria currently, and where we always try to put on the agenda also issues related to TOC. So there's no specific focus so far on cattle rustling and kidnapping, but I think the topic of TOC and also the cross-border aspects are now very much on the mind of partner countries in the region, and also the different fora that deal with capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tobias. And I think in the interest of time, we'll have to wrap up our Q&A session. If there are any more questions, please send them to GI-TOC, and I'm sure we'll do our best to answer them. I now have the honor of giving the floor to the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Switzerland, His Excellency Raphael Nägeli, who will deliver closing remarks. Ambassador Nägeli is the permanent representative of Switzerland to the UN and the OSCE in Vienna, and has previously served in various positions within the Swiss Foreign Ministry, including as head of the Asia and Pacific Division, deputy head of the Human Security Division, and head of the task force for the Swiss chairmanship of the OSCE. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frederick. Good morning, everybody. First, let me thank you to the organizers for bringing us together, and for the panelists for their interesting and thought-provoking presentations. I think it was definitely worth to get up a bit early today to join today's side event. For Switzerland, it was a specific pleasure to see that an organization which is based in Switzerland, GI-TOC, including some Swiss staff, is involved in very closely involved with on-the-ground research on these topics that are relevant to all of us. For Switzerland, especially this year, as we are an elected member of the UN Security Council, and actually this month, where we are assuming the presidency of the Council. As you might know, Switzerland has been involved in the Sahel region for more than 50 years. So we are well aware of the problems of cohabitation between livestock keepers and farmers in the region. Indeed, livestock farming is facing a number of challenges, including the negative effects of climate change, of insecurity, of low productivity due to insufficient infrastructure and the organization of the actors. The occupation of transhumance tracts and of pastoral areas by agriculture and urbanization, by road harassment, by cattle theft, and non-harmonized pastoral schemes hamper mobility and hamper the marketing of livestock and the meat. Competition for natural resources causes inter-community tensions that can be exploited by violent groups. And at the same time, violent groups can exacerbate inter-community tensions. So we entering a vicious circle there. So all of these problems have existed for many years already. But something has changed in the last years, especially in the Sahel, as we have heard. So the research that was presented today by GI-TOC by Flora and Mohammed, has shown, for example, that in West Africa, some illicit economies, as cocaine trafficking, do not have a strong connection with instability. Whereas other illicit economies, such as the arms trafficking, the cattle rustling, and the kidnapping for ransom, have a very strong relationship. When we are considering solutions and resolutions to this issue, it's very important that we take these kind of detailed perspective into account. This understanding allows for a more targeted action to respond to illicit economies as part of a wider stabilization programming from governments and from the international community. And as Flor has rightly said, if we misdiagnose the relationship between illicit economies and conflict, or if we take a one-size-fits-all programming approach, it definitely undermines the efficiency, but it could render crime initiatives, including those that we negotiate here, CCPCJ, as counterproductive. The findings for international donors and for international organizations, as presented by Dr. Akinola and by Tobias, they apply also to Switzerland. So I have nothing to add on that. From a Swiss perspective, I can add, as a UN host government, we consider it of vital importance that when it comes to the fundamental UN issues of peace and security, of development and of human rights, we must not work in silos across the UN system. So that's why it's very important to consider the broader issues of peace, of conflict, and of the political economy of organized crime, be it here in Vienna, be it in Geneva or in New York. Finally, this type of event and discussion demonstrates the value added that the civil society plays in our policymaking process. So we look forward to attending more GI-TOC and other civil society-based events throughout this week and later this year. Thank you very much, and I wish you a productive day.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The time has come to end our side event this morning. I would like to thank all of you, all presenters and all guests in person as well as online for being here today. I wish you a very good remaining day and a very successful CCPCJ. Thank you very much.